Film serials of the 1930s were episodic adventures that premiered weekly in cinemas, usually on a Saturday afternoon. They had action, adventure, and perilous situations in which the hero had to escape from. Almost 50 years later, two fans paid homage to the movie serials on a larger scale and took audiences on a fantastic adventure and gave us one of the greatest heroes to come out of the 20th century. In this episode, I'll be reviewing Steven Spielberg's 1981 Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is Hollywood Classics. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones is sent on a mission to discover why Nazi soldiers are on an archaeological dig in Egypt, and his search brings him face to face with the Ark of the Covenant. And now Indiana Jones must stop them before they can harness the power of the Ark. If I were to ask you to describe the perfect film, what would it include? Would it include action, adventure, horror, comedy, romance? Not only would it more than likely have to include all of those, but the characters would have to be believable, the acting would have to be on point, it would have to have amazing sets, costume design, existential theme, religious morals, and it has to be able to balance all those without that feeling of kind of being spread too thin. Raiders of the Lost Ark has all of that and is often considered one of the greatest films of all time. Raiders of the Lost Ark is a very important piece of cinema that is etched into everybody's mind. Literally everything about this film is significant. The boulder chase, the map room, the Well of Souls, the fight on the airplane, the truck chase, the souls leaving the Ark. These are some of the most profound scenes ever caught on camera. When George Lucas first conceived this project, it was called The Adventures of Indiana Smith. It was a real throwback to the 1930s film serials. Lucas originally thought of this and Star Wars around the same time. It just so happened that Star Wars was picked up first. After the release of Star Wars, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were in Hawaii when Steven Spielberg said that he'd always wanted to direct a James Bond film. At this point, George Lucas told him his idea for The Adventures of Indiana Smith, and Steven Spielberg jumped all over it. With one exception, though. Spielberg said that he didn't really care for the name of it, so George Lucas looked at him and was like, okay, what about Indiana Jones? And Steven Spielberg was like, good, go. And movie history was made. I also just love the development of this movie. When the project was greenlit, they brought on Lawrence Kasdan as the writer of this. And he had a real talent for harnessing the 1930s cinema, and he was able to put all those in a script that kind of reflected that era. Now, Kasdan worked with Lucas previously on The Empire Strikes Back. This is the level of talent that they had behind the scenes of this movie. They had Harrison Ford, who played one of the coolest Star Wars characters of all time. George Lucas, who created Star Wars. Steven Spielberg, who gave us Jaws. And Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote The Empire Strikes Back, hands down the best Star Wars film ever. Not only was their talent unprecedented, but their synergy was just remarkable. They would meet up and talk about scenes that they wanted in the movie, and everybody had something that they wanted to see. And I think for the most part, it was all agreed upon. I don't think there's anything in there that anybody said no to. There are some scenes in there that were put in different movies, but that was just for pacing and the overall scope of the project. Now, I've talked before about actors in movies and in certain roles and how it seems that they're just kind of tailored for that role, or how they took the character and kind of made them their own. And the case couldn't be truer for Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. Not only was it just brilliant casting, but it kind of set the standard for casting heroes. Someone put it perfectly about casting the leading man in a film like this. Women have to love them, and men have to trust them. And I don't think that could be said about anybody else than Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. Of the character himself, he is kind of an amalgamation of actors and characters from other big-budget action films, but he really did kind of become the ideal action hero and kind of set the bar going forward. He was tough, he was rugged, He always got the girls, he went on amazing adventures and saw amazing things, and be multi-generational. It was somebody that kids saw as a hero and could look up to, and yet he still appealed to adults. The whole cast of this movie is just astounding. John Rhys-Davis as Sala is just remarkable. He really made that character his own and was really just beloved. Karen Allen was a brilliant pick for Marion. She really had a kind of Carol Lombard mystique to her. Denham Elliott's Marcus Brody is great. He only has a small role in the film, but as the series went on, he has a much bigger role. Now, Paul Freeman as Belloc is great. I mean, he gave an amazing performance. But as far as the villains go in this movie, the real scene stealer is Ronald Lacy as Toad. He was initially cast because he reminded Spielberg of Peter Lorre, but Ronald Lacy's acting gift was his timing and his ability to read the scenes. The coat hanger scene worked due to Lacy's timing, and his interrogations of Marion are so disturbing and intimidating. He just knew exactly what to convey with that character. One of the things I loved about Raiders of the Lost Ark is how it starts. There is so much mystery enshrined in the beginning of this film. You really have no idea what to expect. Once Indy goes into the error room and grabs the idol and the boulder starts rolling after him, you kind of knew what to expect from the opening scene of Indiana Jones running from the tribe, trying to get to the plane, is without a doubt the definition of Indiana Jones. This is a guy who gets in over his head and has to escape a extraordinary situation. Speaking of defining Indiana Jones, I want to talk a minute about his look. That is probably one of the greatest, most iconic looks to come out of the 20th century. I'm really surprised that Deborah Nadoolman, who came up with Indiana Jones's look, didn't get an Oscar nomination for her costume designs. One, for just really nailing the 1930s wardrobe, but the look of Indiana Jones is just so iconic. It was so simple, yet so impactful. It's remarkable. But going back to the plane scene of Indiana Jones escaping from the tribe, that scene is very important because it gave Indiana Jones one of his greatest characteristics, and that is his fear of snakes. When you picture Indiana Jones, or are asked to describe his characteristics, you tend to imagine this larger-than-life person. But giving him the fear of snakes made him relatable. That essentially turned him into this regular person and really kind of humanized the character. Indiana Jones is probably the most human fictional character I've ever seen. This was made during the golden age of stunt work in films. There was no digitally erasing a person. There was no superimposing a face on an actor's body. This was a real person. This was a real person hanging on to the front of a moving truck, climbing underneath the truck while it drives, and holding onto a whip while they got dragged behind it. I mean, they knew what they were doing, right? This movie was made by people who really respected and appreciated the serials of the 1930s, and they wanted to channel that same feel that they had into this movie, and it worked. This is a very gritty film, I mean, in terms of how it was made. They wanted the stunts and the action sets to maintain the essence of those serials. These are real guys jumping off horses and onto a truck. These are real people fighting on the wing of a plane and all around it as the propellers are on. That's really Harrison Ford running from a giant boulder. This was really starting to be the end of the big action adventure. Once the Indiana Jones series came to an end, a lot of big budget action adventure stories were done on green screen with digitally taking out actors, digitally superimposing faces on actors. I don't think that if Raiders of the Lost Ark came out today with all the advances they have in technology, that it would have been as successful as it was. A large part of its success is due to its very real nature. One of the greatest elements of Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones in general is, of course, John Williams' score. When he wrote the score for Raiders, he went to Steven Spielberg with 2 pieces of music, and he kind of asked him, which one do you like more? And Spielberg loved both of them. He said, can you put both of them together? And John Williams did, and movie history is made. That's the genius of John Williams, is knowing exactly what a theme should sound like, knowing what the scene is calling for, knowing what emotions it needs to invoke. This, to me, is my favorite John Williams score. I think this is his most iconic piece of music. But he also knows the timing of when the music should hit. Every time Jones's head pops up from an amazing encounter or a fantastic chase scene, it just invokes so many emotions, and it's just brilliant. He's a brilliant composer. Raiders of the Lost Ark brought about a whole media franchise. 4 sequels, a TV series, books, graphic novels, video games, and a ride at Disneyland. Raiders went on to be nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Cinematography, and Best Original Score. It only won 5, one for practical effects, but the legacy of Indiana Jones continues in every generation, and is not only considered a great action movie, but one of the greatest films of all time. Thanks for watching. Be sure to comment below with your review of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and as always, I will see you in the next episode of Hollywood Classics.